What's up, everybody? Welcome back to the podcast. I am joined today with Gabe. We also have Mr. MDV and Dennis Marshall for our episode where we talk all things fitness and life. Now, we are going to talk about what it means to train like an athlete at some point on this podcast. But to start off, we are talking about Dennis Marshall. Now, this guy, he's a CrossFit OG. He has done over 300 seminars, training tons of people for so many years every weekend. But he's retiring coming in January from teaching seminars. And just so was brought up that MDV said his favorite seminar story was because of Dennis Marshall. And we just started recording. I don't know what's going to happen right now.
Me neither.
But shit's about to get wild. So what happened, MDV? What's the story? And I hope it's as good as I just pumped it up to be.
We've got a few really good seminars. I'm sure Dennis has a ton of really good seminar staff stories. We've got Fran Boner stories. We've got interns showing up.
What's Fran Boner?
You don't know Fran Boner?
Yeah, there was an epidemic of that.
Dennis knows Fran Boner for sure.
Big time.
I'm not going to be the one to explain Fran Boner. I've got enough male genitalia stories to share on this podcast this morning already, because I just came from LA Fitness where I did a sauna this morning. I was feeling a little like sore throat this morning. And I knew I had the podcast coming up. Didn't get after it this morning, but I went and got a sauna.
Where's this gonna go?
I swear to God, there's like a group text chain for all old men over 60 years old. That's like, today's the day that we're gonna blow dry our balls in the locker room. What is going on with the blow drying of the balls in the locker room?
They know when you're coming.
And it's like a form. And how have these people not aged out of blow drying their balls? Because like 20 years ago, when I was going to Globo gyms, there were still guys using the blow dryer, one leg up on the bench, for sure. And then the ultimate,
was he talking to the other guy?
Finishing move is the powder. The powder at the end is the Mortal Kombat finishing move for these guys. So it's still alive and well.
Real quick though. So I remember back at Milpitas Health and Fitness Days, there's always one guy that would do that. And I happen to always see him leg up, blow drying his balls. This is like a fact. But at LA Fitness, I feel like the times have changed. Like, but maybe they haven't. Are they having like a group? Are they having a group conversation while blow drying their balls? Or is it just one guy?
Well, it's I think the old man demographic in the Globo gym. I mean, if I was going to bet my money on anything besides maybe Tesla stock going up, it would be the fact that old men are always going to be blow drying their balls in the locker rooms of Globo gyms, man. It's just like, and it's always like the locker next to you. Like they have 8,000 lockers in these gyms, and you got your lock on a locker. It's all secure. You're in the middle of nowhere. And then all of a sudden, this guy rolls up after doing 5,000 laps in the pool with his buoys and his Speedo on. And it's incredible detail because it's literally just happened to me. And is getting changed as close to you as humanly possible, where it's like, bro, come on, you're knocking my elbows here. It's like, can we get some space, please? Oh my God, dude.
The good old Globo gym days.
And they have no shame whatsoever. There's no shame. There's like, I'm not saying they should be ashamed, but like they just walk around like they have the biggest package in the world. And it's like, what is going on over here?
Part of me is actually inspired by that.
I want that level of confidence. Yeah.
That's what it is. Like I remember as a young kid working at the conventional gym, I'm like, damn, dude, I wish I can get to a point where I have no F's to give and I'm just like letting it ride. But I wasn't there, and I'm still not there now. But wait, what's the story with Dennis and his seminar story though?
It involves blow drying my balls.
Yeah, that was it.
Perfect segue.
That was it,
right, that was it.
He was really shocked.
I was the guy.
No. So I was a little young gun on CrossFit seminar staff, and I came up on the East Coast, so I had the fortune of working with some really talented people. I worked with Dennis Marshall. I worked with Jen Hunter Marshall, Dennis's wife, a bunch of times. Both completely outstanding trainers, top of the heap. And I think this was in like my first 5 or 10 seminars or something. So I got a decent handle on the material, but I wasn't giving lectures or anything. And I remember the flow master, sorry, trains coming by. I remember the flow master was talking to me about like the importance of timelines and the importance of, making sure you hit your bolds. And bolds are the statements that when you're memorizing the lecture, you have to go out there and deliver those statements verbatim. You can kind of play with the material and mold it, your way with some of the other stuff. But the bolds, you got to hit the bolds. And she's talking to me and she's like, Dennis is going to go up there and give the squats lecture and like, watch how precise he is. First of all, Dennis was like 30 minutes over his timeline. Blew the timeline, like wasn't even close. Like we were all still looking at our watches. Yeah. And what happened was the flow master went up to the side of the lecture and like gave you kind of like the high sign. And she was like very politely tapped her watch and looked at you, and you looked at her. And then you looked straight into the audience or straight into the crowd and you just kept going. There was no end in sight, bro. It was just a nonstop.
That's the confidence.
Lecture.
That's the same level of confidence.
That's right, man. Blow drying my balls
material.
up there.
Some guys blow dry their balls. Other guys miss the timeline.
The importance, like she was nailing. She was like, "Oh, it's so important to hit your timeline and the bolds." And I was like, "All right, thank you, Dennis."
I still haven't figured that one out, dude. Yeah,
that was the story.
If we're not, impressed enough by Dennis Marshall, I just want to give a quick shout out to Dennis. You are you're 40, right?
46.
46. Okay. I mean, yeah. you look 36, so must be that blow dry.
Yeah.
So you're 46, and the other day I saw on social media that you pulled 500.
I did, yeah.
And bench 3.
Bench 3.
Dude.
Yeah.
So I gotta ask, man. I mean, that's awesome. I pulled 440 the other day just for, I think I was pulling for a set of, I don't remember what it was. It was like 440, but it felt heavy, dude. And I was like, all right, I think I'm good. Did 500 feel heavy? And like, where's your appetite for risk now? Like, you know what I'm saying? Because like when I was coming up in CrossFit, like my appetite, especially at an event, was I was down. Like, I mean, dude, I'm gonna break my back trying to get 600. But now that I'm older, I don't really have it doesn't really I don't need, why 500? How'd you feel when you lifted it? Because that's fucking, dude, that's badass.
I mean, it felt the heaviest it's felt ever. It was the heaviest 500 pound deadlift of my life. I mean, I've been able to deadlift 500 pounds for I don't know, 20 years now. So I've done it quite a few times. And I've always just wanted to keep that as like a benchmark number that I could attain. I don't really train the deadlift that heavy all that much, but just to be able to maintain that kind of raw strength is a good way to kind of test it. And I don't know, I've never this may sound weird, but I've never associated lifting really heavy weights with like getting hurt. I don't know. Like to me, and let me reframe that. I've built up this foundation and buffer against getting injured because I've built up this capacity over the course of however long I've been lifting weights, 30 years. So it's not like I just randomly decided to attempt to deadlift 500 pounds, which is completely outside of something I've ever done. It's something I've done many, many times before. I have the capacity to do it. I know I do. I'm confident in it. And, if it's not going to go up, it's not going to go up. But I'm not looking at it like, I hope I don't get hurt here. Like that's just never the perspective that I take when I'm lifting weights. And honestly, I think that's one of the main reasons why I've never really gotten hurt lifting weights is because I just don't even think of it as like a possibility. Of course it is. And that might be unrealistic, but I don't know. I don't really think of it that way.
And it's interesting because one of the topics I threw at you guys that I wanted to dive into today, and I'm curious everyone's take, and this is a really interesting segue, is this idea of like training like an athlete. And I guess the background for that question is, a lot of people in the 40s, 30s, dads kind of, past their like peak hurrah athlete days, will go out there and join a rec softball league or a volleyball league, or even like, for older populations, like getting really into pickleball, and people get really injured doing these things because they go from being sedentary to even just, trying to swing a bat, trying to throw a ball really hard, trying to, race to first base. And to your point, Dan, like no one would ever bat an eye of someone, quote unquote, hey, I'm trying to become active, so I'm joining this rec league. Like, oh, great. Like good for you. But the injury risk there, if you really kind of dial it in and you black and white, like, hey, haven't done anything athletic in years, you've been super sedentary, or maybe you do go to the gym, but you're not being super intentional about the training that you're doing. And now you're going to go and try and, do these athletic movements for the first time in a long time. Like, is it surprising people are getting hurt doing that? And I guess what role does fitness then play to prepare people to continue doing those things long term? Because a lot of times when we do them, we're young, we're made out of rubber and magic. We can do all that stuff. We don't have to warm up, nothing. But I mean, it's a tale as old as time, hey, joining the softball league, pulled a hamstring, tore something, so I guess the question, and Dennis, I'm curious your take first, is what role then does training play for you to continue to do athletic stuff in your older age? And is that a necessary part of like longevity to do quote unquote athletic stuff, throw, swing, jump, stuff like that, sprint?
Yeah, injury is just a result primarily of, there's freak things that happen, but it's primarily just you're loading the tissue beyond its current capacity. So if you spent the past 10 years sitting around doing nothing and you pick up and try to play softball and stop and start and sprint and throw and bend over, yeah, you're putting yourself at much increased risk of getting hurt. The deadlift scenario for me, I've been doing that for so long, like even though it's really, really heavy for me, I've way mitigated the risk of injuring myself because I've built up this huge buffer of capacity in those tissues that are responsible for lifting the weight. So, in so much as you want to be able to continue to do those things throughout the course of your lifetime, however long you want to extend that, then you have to just keep doing them. It's as simple as like use it or lose it. And if you anticipate the ability to be able to do any of those things, throw, run, sprint, jump, and you haven't continuously been doing them for your entire life, you're going to dramatically increase the likelihood that those things are going to result in some kind of pain or injury or potentially, whatever it is.
I'm going to assume here that you haven't thrown a baseball, hard in a while.
Mm-hmm.
Safe assumption.
Sure. Yeah.
I did yesterday, bro. 22 miles an hour, baby.
Yeah. Playing catch with Kaden doesn't count. But so for example, you played baseball in college. Obviously, you were doing those movements at a high level. Is there a part of the type of training that you're doing now that makes you less susceptible to go out tomorrow and, throw a couple, balls really hard and get hurt versus someone that's done nothing? Or are those completely unrelated? Is it you have to be throwing to not hurt yourself throwing? Or is there still some benefit to just the fact that you're a fucking jacked, capable man?
No, of course. Yeah. No, if you have basic strength in the tendons and connective tissue and the muscle, and you have good mobility through the joints because you've trained that's going to translate to everything. Of course.
Dude, Dennis, I gotta take a step back just for a quick second. And Gabe, I definitely want to finish out this conversation, but the fact that you said that you pulled 500 pounds for 20 years and that you didn't at one point feel any level of anxiousness or nervousness about that is really shocking to me. Very much so. And the reason why is that
it's because he doesn't lift with a belt.
Okay. Wait, were you wearing a belt?
No.
Were you wearing straps?
No.
Were you double overhand?
Of course.
What? Wait, you didn't do mixed grip?
No.
What? Wait, you double
That's true
overhand.
OG shit right there.
Wait, did you use a hook grip?
Yeah.
Yeah,
I hook grip when I did.
Come on, don't be
Dennis.
Ridiculous.
Dennis,
slow down.
Okay, so for everybody listening right now, I just want you to take a deep breath and just notice that we have the man right now on the show.
This is not that tremendous of a feat.
This is a tremendous feat, Dennis. Okay, you deadlifted 500 pounds at 46, double overhand with no belt, just like it's nothing. And I love it, man. It's super inspiring. I think that's incredible. And to have the confidence that you feel like you can just lift that basically at any time is really cool. Because for me, as soon as I get over 400 pounds, something starts happening in my mind where I start being I don't know. Yeah. I don't know why that is. You don't have that. So anyway, shout out to you, man.
Have you gotten hurt before deadlifting? Has that happened in the past, or is it just kind of
No, I no, and it's something actually. The more I think about it, it's actually something I think I need to work through, because there's times where I almost feel like I'm willing something in, and I got to be careful about that. In particular with jujitsu. So like in jujitsu, I'll be showing up to the gym, and I know like you got monsters on the mats, and I'll be like, "Fuck, man! Like I got to make sure I stay healthy. I don't get too crazy. I want like, but it's like almost by putting it out there, it's like you're almost like." No, I haven't gotten injured doing deadlifts, but for some reason, once I start lifting big weights in deadlift in particular, it starts throwing me off.
Mm. I mean, jujitsu, that example. Sorry, Matt. To compare those two is apples and oranges, right? Like there's such a, I mean, I'm not a practitioner, but there's a level of uncertainty when you're dealing with another human being that is out of your control, and there's variables that are unaccounted for. And, the more experience you have, the more you kind of have a sense of what all those variables might be and circumstances might be. But like deadlifting it's deadlifting. There's no uncertainty around it. Like, to compare those two is two totally different scenarios, right?
Well, I mean, I agree with Jason where, he was talking about the mental block where he gets to at above 400 pounds. And if that lift is heavy for you, and then you're getting more towards 1 rep max type of territory at, let's say 450 or 475 or whatever, if you're not dialed in between the ears there, if you have self-doubt, if you're thinking about all these other things that could go wrong during the lift, then I would say your chance for injury is probably higher because you're not focusing at the exact moment that you need to be focused, which would be, I'm lifting something that's very heavy or towards the top end of my range. And when you're in that position, when you're going for whatever that is for you, you do have to be dialed in. You do have to be thinking about your midline. You do have to be thinking about how this bar is going to move off of the floor and what's going to happen if it feels, super heavy right below the knee. Like, you do have to be dialed in at those points. So it's not so shocking that I think your chance for injury probably would increase if you are questioning your own, skills or your own fortitude in those moments, for sure.
Yeah.
But injury generally, I agree with Dennis. It's too much, too soon, too fast. That's, of all the injuries I've seen in CrossFit or functional training, weightlifting, it's usually too much, too soon, too fast.
Yeah.
And now, of course, you also have overuse injuries or injuries that kind of accumulate over time, tendinitis and things like that, but the sudden injuries, the things that happen kind of suddenly, besides the freak accidents, it's too much, too soon, too fast.
Just to kind of close the loop on this one question for Dennis, what would your advice be to someone who is feeling the way that I feel, right? So, and maybe the answer for myself is that I don't expose myself to those weights enough. Mm-hmm. Like, I don't go super heavy. Like the workout that you programmed like the other day, 225 deadlift, 315 deadlift for reps, like all good. I just don't really expose myself to these like parameters outside 400. And so maybe that's why I'm like subconsciously kind of like telling myself just to be careful. But what would the advice be on that? Just more exposure? Do you think it's just like, if you, what is it?
Yeah. I mean, you guys talk about it all the time, this idea about earned confidence.
Yeah.
It's the same thing with lifting weights and any exercises that you do. You just have to build up the capacity. You have to earn the capacity to be able to do that stuff. If you don't touch 400 pounds ever, and all of a sudden you just expect to be able to walk in one day and do it, you haven't touched it in a year. Well, you haven't earned the ability or the right to really be messing around with it, right? So yeah, there should be some uncertainty around that. So it's no different when lifting weights. You have to just expose yourself and develop the capacity over years and decades of doing it, so that you can, when needed, when called upon, you have the capacity to do what you want to be able to do. But if that's not important, if deadlifting 500 pounds is not aligned with what you're trying to achieve or with your goals, then obviously you don't have to worry about it. Yeah.
This goes for absolutely everything.
Yeah.
In life.
Yeah. I mean, this is like general.
This is not just lifting at the highest ends of your ranges for the deadlift. This is like if you wanted to show up and compete as a black belt at the ADCC finals, if you wanted to go play poker at a really high level, if you wanted to go, win a dance competition, all of these things, you have to actually put in the work and be intentional. Yep. I mean, there are naturally gifted people, and maybe they can cram some of that learning or experience into shorter amounts of time and get there on a quicker timeline. But the accumulated expertise that you need to do things at a high level, you can't deny that exists in almost every endeavor, right?
Mm-hmm.
Good.
It's funny how exercise is kind of weird outlier where like people, I think, have some false expectations around how quickly they can develop capacity to do certain things, right? Like I wouldn't anticipate that I can start picking up poker and over the course of the next 6 months end up at the World Series of Poker. Like I would anticipate it being like a decades long process to develop that proficiency. But I think people like they start doing CrossFit and they start training and they expect that like within 6 months, they're going to be able to do muscle ups and have all the bells and whistles and be able to lift really heavy weights. And I think their expectation around how quickly they can develop that capacity is unrealistic a lot of the times. And that's what causes people to get hurt, do stupid things, make poor decisions.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I think the problem there is that people think that progress is linear. And when you're in like that newbie stage, you just start extrapolating like, wow, if this got this better in 3 months, then imagine what it's going to get in another 3 months. And that's where it gets really tough. Cause I mean, I experienced this is being real about the diminishing returns with so much of this stuff. Like when you first start lifting weights, first start trying to get strong, you're going to like look at the weight and get strong. It doesn't matter what rep scheme you do. It doesn't matter how often you're doing it, especially if you're on the younger side. I mean, I remember this, you would just PR over and over and over, but you get to a point where it's going to take long. And if you're, immature and stubborn, you're going to try and like just bust your head through that brick wall instead of understanding that, hey, now the process is different. Now it's not about maxing out every time. Now it's about, having a program, staying patient, taking rest days, all of these things. And I know that happens too. I know I'm not unique there, but that's the problem is it's not linear. This progress gets incredibly more difficult with time. I mean, you're not expecting to necessarily PR your deadlift. You're more trying to maintain now, or if anything, I mean, I don't want to speak for you, but that goal might even have to be adjusted in 5 years, 10 years, but you've kind of have the maturity and the knowledge for that versus people that think that, the progress is infinite here. And it's still, every month, 10 pounds are going to go up on the weight. I think that's what a lot of people fall into.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah. Once you get to the top end, it gets harder and harder, right? It's just like body fat. You could drop your body fat for a guy, let's just say from 30 to 20% pretty quickly. And then maybe even from 20 to 15, but to go from 15 to 8 or 10 to 6 is really, really difficult. As an example. Anyways, I see the same thing with like shooting sports or whatever.
There's a cool model, and a D from Working Against Gravity, I don't know if she's still with Working Against Gravity or formerly with.
I think she's sold, but she's still a part of it, I think.
So I had heard of this model before, but she came and spoke at NC Fit a number of years back, and she was talking about this in the context of getting to a certain percentage of body fat or a certain type of physique. And when you start your journey, the margins of error are on anything. Even if you want to go to the NBA, you want to be a world-class poker player, you want to win the CrossFit Games, whatever. When you first start something, the margins are here, right? Like you have so much room to grow. You can do other things. You're still going to get better at the things that you're practicing. But then as you get more, as you progress more and you get more towards like the pinnacle of excellence, the margins for your growth are much smaller. And then also the amount of effort that you need to put in to get to that next level or to earn that spot in the NBA or go to the World Series of Poker or win the CrossFit Games, they're so much higher. You have to put so much more into it. You don't have as much time. It's like if you wanted to go out there and play pickup basketball and you wanted to be, one of the best kids in your neighborhood, depending on the neighborhood, but like you could go out there and you could do a lot of other stuff, right? You could still be doing all these other things. But if you want to go to the NBA and you wanted to be the next LeBron James, like you have to be incredibly, incredibly focused. And the closer that you get to that, the less room for other things outside of that.
Mm.
Yeah.
It's an interesting flip side to the whole earn confidence thing that, again, I heard on this podcast with the ultra marathon runner, but that I'm really embracing with this marathon I have coming up is he talked about it working to his benefit that he had never done a 100-mile race because he went to it with almost this naivete of not knowing how incredibly difficult and how just that unknown, he talked about it helping him. And I've kind of embraced that because I've never run a marathon before. This is my first time. And like everyone talks about this like inevitable wall that you hit like around mile 19, mile 20. And like, I don't know what that's going to feel like. I literally can't know. Even on like longer training runs, you can't emulate what that's going to feel like. And I love that quote. Me and Jason talked about it, that someone said that a marathon is just a 20-mile warm up for a 10K race. So I'm almost going into it, obviously without the earned confidence of like, hey, I know what this, 26.2 mile race is going to feel like. I don't, and there's no way of knowing it. But I'm trying to almost use that as an advantage of, if I did know, maybe there would be additional anxiety or nerves going into that, like, 20, 21 mile mark of like, oh man, it's coming and I'm going to have to dig down. Instead, I'm just like, hey, I'm going into it. I have a plan. I have a pace. I mean, I'm sure it's going to suck, but, so you can look at it both ways. Obviously this is kind of a unique example, but, I'm hinging on it because I don't have the experience, it's going to be a first time. So it'll be fun.
That's like the old open workout question, right? And I think a lot of listeners who might have done CrossFit before or participated in the open can relate to that, right? Like you see an open workout, it looks really scary, really daunting. You haven't done it before. You don't know how you're going to do it, but maybe you have a plan. You go in and you do it. And then, well, what do you do if you're not happy with your score? What do you do the second time around? Like, do you have the benefit of doing the workout the first time around and understanding the flow, the sequence, how you're going to approach it? Or do you know deep down in your gut how badly it's going to fucking hurt for you to earn those extra few reps? And like, I think there's a balance there, right? Like that one and done, get it done, don't have to think about it. And then the other side of the coin is like, man, I have to dig really, really deep. I have to go to a place I'm really uncomfortable with, and I know it's coming.
Oof. Oh man,
there's research that supports the idea that like how you think about fatigue affects when you experience the onset of fatigue. Like there's very controlled studies that show like when you're told how long you're going to be doing something for, that dictates the point at which you start to experience fatigue. And like the longer that that time frame is, the longer the onset of fatigue is at like equal levels of effort. And then there was a woman that she had like a brain injury. I think they talked about this on the Rich Roll podcast, I think, if I'm remembering correctly, or if it might have been in a book that I read, this book called Endure. I think he might have talked about it.
From Cameron Haynes?
No, there's another book called Endure, the same title, but it's a different book. It's written by, it's all around like sports science, around the physiology of endurance and like what causes limitations, what causes fatigue, what forces people to slow down, or and he talks about this case study of a woman, and I'm going to butcher it a little bit. It's been a while since I read it. But she had like a traumatic brain injury, maybe, or a stroke. I forget exactly what happened, but she had some kind of damage to her brain, and it damaged the part of her brain that had a sense of time. So she wouldn't know if it was like today, tomorrow, yesterday, like what time of day it was. Her internal clock was all messed up. And she became this like world-class endurance athlete because she would go out and run, and she had no idea how long she was running for, how much longer she had to run for. Like she didn't know if she had been running for 30 seconds or 5 hours. And she could just sustain this like incredible pace for really, really long periods of time because she had no like internal mechanism to say like, oh shit, I've been running this long, I should be tired. Or, oh man, I have to run 5 more hours, so I should slow down. Like she just ran. It was like Forrest Gump in real life. It was wild.
That's
yeah.
awesome.
And she became this like world-class endurance athlete, like set all these world records.
I really need to look that up. I'm really curious how that goes down, right?
It's a
Like
cool
imagine, like it's like there was that movie with Adam Sandler where like it was like the same day over and over again for that girl. Do you know what I'm talking
50 First Dates?
Yeah.
50 First Dates. Yeah, same idea.
Great movie. Great movie, by the way.
Hey,
But this is
I'm
super
an Adam
interesting
Sandler
because
fan.
Adam Sandler's a stud, man. I don't think Adam Sandler gets enough love for creating movies that are still hold up and then still creating very funny movies to this day. And he's apparently a really nice guy and a great basketball player. But there's something to this concept. And I don't want to get too woo-woo, but Gabe, you sent out one of the topics that we were going to talk about today. And, Dennis, that story is super interesting because like, I just the more I start thinking about things, the more I think that your body intuitively knows. Like your mind, you can tap into a level of your mind and intuitively know what to do. This is the power of like your mind and your body connection. And like this came to me when I was thinking about nutrition. I'm thinking about movements and thinking about fitness. And like, I just feel like sometimes, we over science things to a point, but then like I hear stories about this where it's like the power of this woman's mind now. And it's because this thing was shut off. Like she just went and continued to go. I think that there's like a lot of validity there. I think that there's a certain level of intuition, certain level of knowledge that you can have about, hey, I'm doing this thing or putting this thing into my body, and this is intrinsically good for me. And I know it because my body tells me it's good. Maybe that's a little too woo-woo. There's a little bit more on like the nutrition side of things, which I've been thinking about a lot lately. But that story about that woman is fascinating. I got to learn more about that for sure.
Yeah, it's a great book.
The power of the mind, man, is I don't think that stuff's woo-woo at all, because there's so much research to back up, like Dennis said, a lot of this stuff about, your perception of whether it's the pain or difficulty or whatever, or like this whole concept that like, your mind, your brain has like a built-in safety mechanism where it's telling you to shut down.
Yesterday, Gabe.
Yeah, it's telling you to shut down way before you actually have to shut down. And sometimes they bring up the example of like high level, like Olympic, whether it's, runners, or there's actually a video that I just watched the other day of a triathlete who are literally like steps away from the finish line and collapse and like can't get there. And the difficult thing for the average Joe to understand is that like you or me or, the average person would have stopped like 3 miles ago, because 3 miles ago you would have been like, dude, I'm in so much pain and discomfort, like I can't go anymore. But the thing that makes a lot of like high world-class athletes that sets them apart is the fact that like they hear that same message and they can either ignore it or run right through it. And they actually get to a point where their body gives out, because you and me were like, hey, you were 5 steps from the finish line. Like I would have finished. I've gotten to many points where I was like, oh, dude, I got to stop. But if it was 5 feet away, I would have definitely crossed it. It's difficult for us to understand that they literally have crossed those thresholds and many more miles back. And now they're actually at the point where like there's some sort of like physiological like shutdown that's happening.
Where they black out on a run in front of a bunch of people, including their fiance. I've been there before.
Exactly.
I've been there before.
Jason does.
I do know. I know exactly how that's like. But I was gonna say that's what we were talking about yesterday with the art of fear, right? And this intuition and how your brain has just been like it's been developed over generations and generations. We were talking about it in particular about like utilizing fear or your intuition as a mechanism to stay safe, in particular for men and women. But like that gut feeling. And it's just an example of how your brain is so smart, right? We were using this as an example. I've been reading a book, and it used a bunch of case studies about, okay, I'm listening to a book, jerk. All right.
I didn't say anything. I didn't say anything.
It's fucking Gabe, and he knows it.
I didn't say
He's looking
anything.
at me. No,
I've been giving him a hard time every time he says that he's reading these books because he listens to the Audible version. And we had this whole debate about whether it's reading or not.
And then, of course, Liz pulls up the definition of reading. It's like, written text, blah, 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 blah.
Well, I mean, you said that with the confidence of a man blow drying his balls in the locker room, bro. Like, you said that like
been reading this book every night. It's giving you a hard time.
I've been reading this really good book while being on the step machine. And it taught me a lot about intuition. Anyways.
No, but honestly, and I try and think about this a lot, especially like as I'm getting more into this endurance stuff, because it's really what it comes down to is, can you shut down those messages of like, I can't anymore. Like my legs can't go anymore. And knowing that you can, like you very much can. Those are just built-in safety mechanisms. Your body's telling you to stop because you're doing something potentially dangerous, terribly uncomfortable. You have a little bit more in the tank always.
Yeah, well, I mean, if we using myself as an experience of the CrossFit Games, I'll just summarize it like this: like you have more in the tank, in particular if you have a reason why you're doing it, right? So like if you have a strong why of why you're training that hard, why you're competing that hard, why you want to get a sub 3 hour marathon, like if you have a real deep why, then you'll have more in the tank. If you don't, then you'll probably give up a little bit sooner than others, right? I mean, you look at like guys, and we've had plenty of guys who are in special forces come on the show and talk about like the guys who are like super capable, super fit. Like it doesn't necessarily mean they're going to get through, buds or name the selection process. It's the people that have like a strong reasoning of what they're doing combined with a shit ton of training, right? Both of those things together. Using the CrossFit Games as an example, I've seen plenty of people who fail out, who are very physically gifted, just because mentally they didn't have a strong like anchor that allowed them to keep going through those tough times.
Some of this can come back to like comfort versus discomfort, right? And if we're maybe more relatable topic of conversation. So let's say you have a certain goal for your nutrition, and you put that on the horizon for yourself. You got all the stuff written down for yourself. You know exactly what you're going to do. But then at 8:00 at night, you've had all your food for the day or whatever. You're kind of buttoning it up. And now you got that hankering for a few scoops of ice cream or whatever it is. It's like those moments, those are the times in which you have to make the decision whether you want to be a little bit, and this is a little bit uncomfortable, just a little bit uncomfortable. You're going to go with the discomfort of not having that dessert that maybe you're used to having, or you're going to go and grab a spoon and say, fuck it. It's just a couple of spoonfuls of ice cream. I can get back on the horse tomorrow with my diet. And though in those times, like you have to, if you really want something, if you really want to achieve something, or if you really want to get to a certain state, or like you put a priority on there on a goal, like you have to make those decisions more often than not in favor of choosing the uncomfortable thing for you, right? Like delayed gratification, putting off what you might want a good feeling from right now to eventually get to what you ultimately want to achieve, which is the bigger goal down the road. So this example is heavily detailed because like it's something that I still struggle with as well, in terms of like the comfort of right now versus the discomfort of ultimately achieving the goal. But I know I can't be alone in that. So I just wanted to put it out there. Specifically with nutrition, it can get very tough.
Yeah, which is a good segue to one of the things we want to talk about, which was what everyone's doing for nutrition these days. Dennis had brought that up since me and Jay had talked about nutrition a couple podcasts ago. And I'm curious what everyone's doing, because I know we've all gone through naturally an evolution and an arc. I know I've tried a bunch of things. I know so much changes also, like when circumstances in life changes, like there are things that I could have done before and have done before that like I just wouldn't even entertain now with kids in the picture. So I'm curious, MDV, if you want to start, kind of what's nutrition look like now? What are those goals and what's on your mind?
Yeah, I've tried a lot of things as well. I went through a period of time where I was heavily focused on minimally processed, as little ingredients as possible for your foods. And generally that's where I land on things. I'm a big quality of food guy. It generally works better for me. My personality works better going that way versus going the quantity or weighing and measuring type of equation. They're both important, having some modicum of quality, having some modicum of quantity. I think finding that right mix for you to achieve your goals and how much you're willing to sacrifice on both of those ends, I think is ultimately like unlocking the equation to nutrition success for people. But right now, what I'm currently doing right now, again, it comes back to this kind of like intuition thing, this like a little bit more woo-woo stuff. So I was stretching the other night, and I was stretching for a really long time, like a really long time. And I've been stretching. I've been trying to stretch more. And one of the things that happens when I stretch, it almost becomes like, again, this is going to sound so woo-woo, but it like becomes like a meditative state for me. Like you get to a depth of stretching where it's like, oh, wow, I can actually feel what my body is supposed to feel like, instead of feeling, beat up or tight or sore or whatever. Like, I think the operating state for somebody who trains a lot, sometimes you just get like really, really tight. And when I was stretching, this idea about nutrition popped into my head, and this list of foods started kind of coming to me, and I just wrote them down after I was done stretching. And it was more of this like intuitive approach of like, this list of things makes me feel good while I'm eating it and after I'm eating it. And, it's a fairly extensive list. It's got a bunch of foods on it, but there are certainly things on there that I might have, or not on there that I might have been eating currently that I don't necessarily feel so great about after I eat, whether it's bloated or I wake up the next day and I feel sluggish or whatever. So what I'm trying now is I wrote down this list. I'm going to try to keep things as close to this list as possible. And then I'm going to see what happens in about 6 to 8 weeks after following this. So I'm going to give myself I want to give it a hard 6 weeks of eating this certain way, this like intuitive way that I just sat there and thought about what makes me feel good. Not feel good in the moment, not feel good about, oh, this is so delicious, I want to eat all of this. I think it's a big difference. But what makes me feel good? What makes my body feel good? So I've got that list, and that's what I'm going to go after.
Is anything on that list like what you wouldn't expect? So like on that list is like gummy bears on that list?
No, not gummy bears. Gummy bears didn't make the list. It was a close second. It's on it's on like the second list. That was the deeper stretching that came to me later on. No, I think the only thing that is on this list that I don't eat a tremendous amount of is leafy greens, like lettuce for some reason, like romaine lettuce. Sounds so crazy. Popped into my head as something that I really enjoy eating. I feel really good after eating it. So I'm going to add a lot more like leafy types of greens into my diet, which I haven't been eating as much of for a while. The other thing was, and this is kind of weird, fresh baked bread came into the list somehow.
Yes.
So
yes.
It's not going to be store-bought. I'm actually going to make it or have somebody make it. So that's
sourdough, baby.
Yeah. Anyway, so we're going to see what happens here. We're going to go with this woo-woo intuitive approach for 6 weeks and see what happens.
Dude, if we were a part of a drinking game and we said every time the MDV says woo-woo, you have to take a shot, I think we'd be like 10 shots deep right now. It's good.
We'd be pretty fucked up. But yeah, I just think that there's something to it, man. I'm going to try it and see what happens. So I'm going to stick to the list for 6 weeks.
I like it, man. I think there's so much to doing the work to actually know what some of those foods are that make you feel good and not feel good, because a lot of that stuff is going to be super individual and also go counter to a lot of the obvious nutrition recommendations of, like, I'll give you an example. Vegetables are supposed to be good for you. You're supposed to get your vegetables. I think that, there's fiber content there. They fill you up. But like, I have tried many things and I've just learned that there are certain cruciferous vegetables that honestly don't make me feel good. Like, I get super gassy and super bloated. And so I avoid those. And some people might hear that and be like, oh, like you're one of those, like, vegetables are bad for you, avoid. But no, it's just something that I've experienced over time. So that wouldn't make my list. And I think that that's an important thing that doesn't happen overnight. Like, you've been very intentional about your nutrition for a long time. And I think that's what's gotten you to the point where you understand that these foods make you feel good both in the moment and after. But that doesn't happen overnight. That takes a lot of, elimination diets, experimenting, just even being aware of how these things should be making you feel. So no, that's cool, man. Dan, what do you have going on?
Yeah, I take the woo-woo approach also. So
shot number 11.
My approach is pretty much identical to MDV's, and I've been doing that for a really long time. Just kind of eating intuitively. If I'm hungry, I eat. I stop eating when I'm full. I pay close attention to how food makes me feel, and I try to avoid foods that don't make me feel so great in like the immediate sense right after or hours or a day after. And I've kind of narrowed down that list. I didn't actually write it down, but I have a pretty, short list of foods that I rely upon heavily. Yep, there you go. Mine's kind of up here. And then, with the kids now, there'll be times where I'll fall into, like, during the week, kind of letting it slip a little bit. But I really try to be strict during the week, and then just allow some freedom on the weekends to have pizza with the kids and have some ice cream and stuff like that. I'm kind of like, there's two types of people when it comes to food that, based on some of the stuff that I've read, like there's abstainers and there's moderators, right? So like abstainers can have to be like all in on something and just avoid stuff they don't want to consume completely. And then the moderator is someone that like can get away with like kind of someone like you, Gabe, talked about like every night having like a little something, just a little cookie or like I'm not having a cookie. I'm having I'm having a half gallon of ice cream if I'm gonna go in on it. So I have to just
my own heart.
Yeah, I have to abstain from that stuff completely. And if I'm going to go in, I'm going to go all in. And that happens, maybe once a week, twice a week, something like that on the weekends. But yeah, for the most part, no.
You sound like The Rock right now, dude. The Rock, like putting out his cheat meals, like those things look legit.
Yeah. I've followed that pattern for a long time. And again, I have a pretty short list of foods that I try to consume primarily.
I'm curious for both of you though, is that list, like we're essentially talking like primarily whole foods, right? Like where there isn't anything that is processed or packaged in that list. Like we're talking about like vegetables.
Not really.
Carbs. No, yeah.
And we see it on the lean protein. Wait, put it back for a second.
This is literally the list that I wrote down. It was lean protein. So I do eat a lot of red meat, but I'm actually going to eat a little bit less red meat and start to eat a little bit more fish and chicken. So lean protein, salt, eggs, fruit, honey, avocado, olive oil, lemon, nuts and seeds, sweet potatoes, oats, fresh bread, raw leafy greens, and lettuces. And then that's it. That's where my list stopped. And, you could make the argument, hey, more stuff needs to go on this list. Hey, why didn't you add X, Y, or Z? And this is just what intuitively I wrote down in that moment of kind of mindfulness, in that deep stretching woo-woo state.
Yeah, I mean, I could run my list off. It's probably very similar. Mine's like just meats, fruit are like predominant. Leafy greens, butter to cook with, or lard. And I don't do nuts. I do some potatoes, primarily white potatoes, some sweet potatoes. I try to avoid rice. Rice doesn't really agree with me all that much. And that's like really it.
We've gotten
pretty much the same list.
Yeah. Super similar. For me, especially now, like I've had a lot of success in counting macros, but it's interesting. I just watched the video this morning and it was talking about like the two like most important factors to being someone that's going to gain unwanted weight. And it was trait conscientiousness and food drive. And the interesting thing, because what you guys are talking about is essentially food drive. Like there are people out there that can have 3 cookies, 3 chips, and just be like, that was good, all good. If you're a very high food drive individual, like you can have the whole bag. And I actually think that I'm very much a very, very high food drive person. And I'll give you guys a perfect example because we were just together. I'm the person that if we go out to the Greek spot by Campbell and there's any pita laying around in other people's plates that aren't eating it, I will ask if I can eat it and I will eat it. Like I will clean out anything that is on that table, and I have no self-control of that in the moment and honestly feel pretty crummy afterwards. But I have found that I have a lot of success in having like a number and a prescription that I need to hit. And that seems to override the fact that I have that very high food drive, because I know that I do. Like if I know that I have 200 calories left at the end of the day, and that means that is 2 cookies and that is a number and that is what I'm putting in the app and that is what I am holding myself to, like it bothers me more to not hit that potential target. And I know that this is maybe unique to me, but it's the plan keeps me in check. It's the days where I like get to the middle of the day and I've already kind of like fudged stuff up, or it was kind of hard to keep track, and I leave the rest of the day to just like whatever, and there is no measuring, that I fall into the trap of then it's like it's all let loose because I don't have that number that's keeping me to what I'm doing. So I have found success in that because I actually, even though now every night I have some sort of dessert, really enjoy it, but I literally have like, I'll have 2 cookies if I have the macros for it. I'll have just 1 if that's all I have left. But I would easily, if that was, oh, I'm not counting today and I'm at, a social outing with you guys, I would be the one that would, Jason will order 2 desserts. He'll have 1 bite of it and I'll have the rest of both 100%, which is what happened when we went out to dinner together. If you guys remember at the golf course, like that's literally what happened. I was like, no, I don't want dessert. Jason like insisted we get 2 desserts. He had like 2 bites of one and I finished the other 2. Right. Like that's me without having.
I'm so disciplined on my nutrition, bro. That's why.
I think you actually have pretty low food drive, Jay. And I'm curious your thoughts, but I think you're actually someone that has,
I would agree,
pretty low food drive. It's actually really, really fascinating. Like I have the running joke that when we're filming content, we're going to spend a whole day together. I need to bring so many snacks. Jay will not eat the entire day.
Yeah.
And I think that's
like I've talked to you about this before, man. Like your ability to follow a plan, like when you have a plan, you execute on your plan to the T. And this is not, I'm not trying to call you out, but this is like a compliment to you. Like when you have a training plan, when you have a professional work plan, when you have even a nutrition plan, like, dude, you're the guy waking up at 4 a.m. to go log their 12-mile run, man. Like, because it's part of your plan. I think that that makes a lot of sense to me, that when you have that macro prescription, that it's like very easy or easier for you to follow because of how you respond to having that like structure. And you're incredibly disciplined when you do have structure.
No, I appreciate that. And I think that, again, the biggest thing, and just to answer the question of like what I'm doing for nutrition now, I actually don't like super strictly count every day, but I think it's because I did it for so long and we eat the same thing every day that it's just, I know based on what I've done, kind of how much I have left, but it's still, I would consider what I do is counting macros because I know in my head how much I'm eating any given day. And I know like what numbers I should be hitting. And I kind of like hold it by that. And I would say that like food quality is important. Like I very much don't subscribe to the like, hey, if it fits the numbers, it's whatever you want. But it does give me a little bit of leeway to, because again, the food drive thing is a problem for me. Then I'm not necessarily worried about like, finishing one of Shay's snacks or like, doing this or that, or like grabbing something that's in the pantry because we have for the kids or whatever. It's kind of like, okay, whatever, because I know that my main meals are, and if I were to kind of share the list of foods that we eat every day, it's usually Greek yogurt, fruit, eggs, meats, like you guys said. We alternate between rice and potatoes or sweet potatoes at night with a meat. And then like the little dessert treat is pretty much like the list, but probably I would say with more flexibility than you guys have both during the week and the weekends, because I feel like I'm held by the number that I'm trying to hold, which I think, again, works for me. It might work for certain personality types. And for other people, it is going to be, hey, this is my list of foods and I'm not worried so much about the quantity. The 2 things that I'll add to that in my experience with like talking to people about nutrition, and Ariel's worked with a lot of nutrition clients, so we talk about this a lot, is I do think that for some people who struggle with like the late night snacking, that is something that can be fixed by eating enough during the day. And I'm not saying that this applies for everyone, but I know that a lot of people fall into this, like skipping breakfast, being super strict about lunch. And next thing you know, like if you were to actually count what that looks like, you've had like 600 calories and it's like 8 p.m. Like, of course, the bag of chips sitting in the pantry is going to look at you as like a temptation. You can't stop yourself. But if you would have had breakfast and lunch and prioritized, filling meals and protein, maybe that thing wouldn't be as tempting. And again, that applies for some people.
Mm-hmm.
What about you, Jay?
Oh, dude, we've talked about this on the podcast. I eat hella clean all the time. No, I don't have a list. I don't have a strategy. I find what's available in the moment and I consume it, or I don't. Like yesterday, I don't think I had anything to eat until I got done training. Like it was probably 2:00. I walked in the refrigerator there. I didn't see anything. So I found some bacon. I put some cheese on top that I put in the microwave and I ate that. And then a little bit later, I had peanut butter and honey. And then I trained again with Caden. And then at night we had fish with orzo pasta. And I think I probably had 2 cookies. So far today, I had some eggs with some bacon and a little piece of tortilla. and it's 10 o'clock, and that's uncommon. Normally I don't eat much except for like a bran cereal until like 2 o'clock in the afternoon. So I'd say that my nutrition habits are varied. They are random, and that's just the way it is. I think that what I'm going to start doing though is especially after the High Rocks training was try and get some better nutrition before training for sure. I think that like this morning I was on a stepper for 100 floors. I never eat anything before I do any of this kind of stuff. And maybe my performance could be better if I did. I rarely eat any fruit. Rarely. I can't think of the last
20
time
minutes,
I had any.
100 floors, about 20 minutes for you?
Yeah. At 13 on the level. I can't think of the last time I had fruit. I eat whatever Ashley makes for dinner, or Caden, he also cooks. I eat whatever they make, and that's just the way it is. Like, I don't put much thought into it, actually. Now that I'm talking about it, it doesn't really come across. Like, if I'm at a coffee shop, I'll find something that I want to eat. Maybe it's a breakfast sandwich. If I'm at home, I'll look in the refrigerator and just see what I can randomly pick up. And I'd say the only consistent meal is dinner. That's it. I probably fast most of the day.
If you had to guess, sorry to interrupt you, do you have any sense of like how many calories you consume in a day? Like a ballpark, like on average?
I mean, I don't know, Gabe, MDV, what do you guys think? 2,000, 3,000?
Well, I mean, you backload a lot of your food. So you don't eat a lot in the morning. Eating eggs and bacon for you right now, like you said, is atypical. So a normal day for you, from what I know, maybe you get some gyro meat and maybe some pita and some hummus at some point, like 1 o'clock or 2 o'clock. You're eating like some protein, some fat, a little bit of carbs. And then you have a dinner, normal size dinner. I don't think you like overeat at dinner, but then you usually have like some sort of cereal or some like ancient grains or things like that, like afterwards. I think like that's a normal day of eating for you. Right. From what I've seen, you can tell me if I'm wrong, but like you're probably hovering some days around like 1,800 calories. And then other days you're probably at like 2,800 calories, depending on like how heavy you're eating at night. But you do not eat a lot food volume generally.
Den, do you know how many calories ballpark you probably know?
I mean, anytime I've ever tracked it, I'm usually like 2,200. It's like a normal day for me. And that's like three square meals. Like that's just three. That's what I eat 3 square meals.
That seems so low.
It is.
I mean, the reason why I'm asking Jason is because I think like it defies
like physics.
Well, what I think is like the most just well accepted explanation of like calories in, calories out, how it affects body composition, how it affects output, how it affects function. Like, I think there's so many outliers to that stuff that I've always just had a hard time accepting it as doctrine. That like you need to consume X number of calories per day in order to attain or in order to account for how much energy you're going to expend, to account for a certain type of body composition, muscle mass, like, because he's just, I mean, Jason's an obvious exception to the rule that like there's no way he's consuming. Yeah, that's, I mean, there's just, it's such a multifactorial discussion that to boil it all down to like, well, in order to gain weight, you got to consume more than you expend. And in order to lose weight, you got to be in a caloric deficit. And in order to gain muscle mass, you got to consume X number of grams per protein per pound of body weight. You got to, like, all the numbers, all the discussion around numbers to me always just falls flat because there's so many exceptions to that I've seen and I've experienced myself personally that I don't know. I think there's a woo-woo side of it that is unaccounted for in the research that you continue to see over and over again with people.
Well, it's interesting. Leading to the new year, we're going to do some nutrition stuff. I'm intrigued on it only because on this podcast we try and share information about what we're doing. I talk a lot about like my training. I train a lot. I train hella hard. I do a bunch of different things from tactical to jiu-jitsu to, all kinds of stuff. But when it comes to nutrition, there's no like charter that I've ever followed other than what we're just talking about. So if that's a charter, then that's the charter. I don't know. But like, I think a lot of times, and maybe this is a good example to talk about, like you hear influencers talk about intermittent fasting or keto or this. And I've tried some of those things, but it's like, I'm just telling you the way I do it. And it just feels intuitive to me. And it most important than anything for me is like, I want my brain to feel like it's super clicking most of the day. And so if I eat too much, I feel sluggish. And maybe it's just because I haven't been able to refine what those foods are. But that's in general why I don't eat much until my eating window starts around like 4 p.m. most of the time. I'll have very little to eat until 4, and I'll probably have trained quite a bit. But I generally train anaerobic. When I've trained aerobic, like with Gabe, I'll hit walls because I don't have enough nutrition to back that up. But because for the most part, I'm training anaerobic type stuff, or if I'm training aerobic, it's earlier in the morning and maybe I have more, I don't know. But that's what I currently do.
Yeah. It's interesting, Dennis, because I know same thing, right? Like you hear of like these edge cases, exceptions, like doesn't apply. I guess like in my experience, ever since I've counted, like especially with the amount of time I've done it, like I know that if I am at 25, I will lose weight. If I'm at 27, I won't see it move. If I'm at, 3,000 or up, I will gain weight. And it's just like, it's like a knob that I can just like crank it this way, crank it that way, give it like 2-3 weeks. And I see the trend going exactly the direction that I'm expecting it to. And, to MDB's point, I mean, some of this is to a fault, but I like when I am like, hey, this is what I'm doing now. I'm going to gain or I'm going to cut. Like I am maniacal about the counting. Like there is nothing that doesn't go through a scale and isn't measured like to the point. And I do think with a lot of people, ballparks tend to be really off, or even their rendition of counting tends to be off because there's so many ways to count inaccurately that doesn't account for the cooking oil that you're using or like the little handful of thing of here. So I do think that, at least my opinion is that the calorie in, calorie out, while it isn't the end all be all specifically of health, I do think that just is what it comes down to. When are you gaining weight? Are you losing weight? And I've experienced it. And I think that what's more going on in my experience is people just don't know how to count accurately.
Let me ask you a question. So when did calorie counting become en vogue? Like when did anybody go, okay, was it like Weight Watchers? Was that like the first time when people were like, oh, I'm going to start calorie counting and this is the end all be all for me of gaining and losing weight? Because what were people doing before calorie counting? Like what was everybody just obese in medieval times because they didn't count macros? Like were there jacked people? Like what was going on there?
No, I mean, there's obviously just a difference in the world that we live in with access to high calorie foods. Like you never had to count calories before because all the foods you had access to weren't a problem. They weren't highly palatable. They weren't, addictive in many ways. They weren't accessible everywhere. Like you go to Home Depot and at the checkout line, you can grab 500 calories worth of a Reese's and a soda. That used to not be the case, right? But
is that
so then
keep going.
It's just, there was a time where there wasn't a need. Like you would never have, if anything, people maybe weren't eating enough. And then I think there became a time where like, hey, we have access to all of this. So I'm sure that was where it was born out of like, hey, this is something you have to measure because the amount that you have access to and the amount that like you'll eat these very addictive foods, left to your own devices is a problem, which, you see in today's kind of society.
And I'm not knocking macros for people who it works for.
Sure.
I think that there's real problems in fundamentalism in general, and not only in nutrition, but politics. Fundamentalism is in my opinion, generally a problem because then you only subscribe to one point of view, and that point of view is the only point of view. And if somebody has a difference of opinion or does something differently, then they're wrong and you're right. So in nutrition, there's a point of view on a lot of this stuff where it's like people are like, oh, calories in, calories out is the only way. Macro counting is the only way to do it. It's like the only thing that works. I don't think that that's true, nor do I think that, following one sort of specific elimination diet is the only thing that works for people. I think that there's a lot of nuance between these things. It depends on the individual. It depends on the genetics. It depends on the type of person they are in terms of like following types of plans, and whether or not Dennis was talking about before, like, are you a moderation person or are you an abstaining type of person? But one of the curious things about like all nutrition and stuff too is like when you start to look at the stark rises of obesity or like high levels of heart disease or mortality, and you see these things that have become epidemic in the United States, it kind of all those things all kind of land on the map at the introduction of like highly processed foods. And then the proliferation of highly processed foods, you start to see these things like hockey stick go up. So I mean, if you're looking purely at data, I think like that is a moment in time in which you have to step back and reflect on and go, okay, there was something that happened here that took a fairly healthy society and now has made these things a major issue that if they aren't addressed, I mean, we're just going to continue to see, childhood obesity rise, levels of type 2 diabetes rise, levels of, CHD, all this kind of stuff is going to continue to rise. And the point on the map usually is around like the industrial food complex, right? Like right when that stuff started to become the main source of nutrition for people in Western society.
Yeah, we could pull up that. I mean, that's a good conversation to have. Like another, that's a deeper, another conversation. Because basically you're alluding to, and it's kind of like training too, MDV. It's like this fundamental idea. And I think that, probably everybody on this, probably all of us at some point, were very rigid in our opinions on whatever. Like Gabe yelling at me about oat milk, or, I don't know, Dennis, like whatever, right? Having like a very strong opinion on this and nothing else. Like I remember when I first found CrossFit and when I was really teaching seminars, like the idea of doing bicep curls or single isolation exercises was like so frowned upon, right? And it starts, you get in your own echo chamber and you start really like almost like hating on that. And it's like, well, dude, like if that works for people, like hell yeah. It's the same thing in nutrition. Like you got to find what works for you. It's the same thing in training. Like find a program, find what fires you up, right? And if it's jujitsu or strength conditioning or bodybuilding or whatever, I just think having that kind of like open-mindedness is important because different strokes for different folks is as I get older, that's all that matters. I just want people training hard, getting after it, and finding a nutrition plan that works for them. I mean, you're hearing what works for me, but I'm flexible and I'm open-minded to changing that, by the way.
The nutrition thing is interesting because like what you mentioned, MDV, like both sides will point to that exact thing as like supporting for like what they believe. Like they'll say that, that food becoming available just meant that now we had access to more calories. Hence it's a calorie in, calorie out issue. The other side of the coin will say, hey, these foods became available, which is when you started seeing things like seed oils and all of these other chemicals and things that shouldn't be food become food. Hence, it's the ingredients that kind of led us. And I think obviously it's both. Like obviously it's both. I don't think anyone would disagree that it isn't both. No, and I completely agree. It shouldn't come down to, no, it's only this one thing or it's only this other thing. And again, the challenge, and Dennis, you mentioned this, and I thought about it before, but I think that it's 100% true, is the evidence-based community is evidence-based almost to a fault. Like if it doesn't have a peer-reviewed study that shows that seed oils are bad for you, then seed oils must not be bad for you. But I think that there is a woo-woo element, if you want to call it, or whatever. There's just some things that can't be studied with a peer-reviewed study. They just can't. For whatever reason, they can't. And that will never be captured. And the people that have this like high barrier of evidence that they need for you to convince them that this just isn't something that like I should be eating because it just doesn't make me feel good. Like I don't care that there isn't a peer-reviewed study that says that this isn't bad. Like I'm not going to eat it because every time I eat it, I feel bloated. I feel terrible. That should be worth something. And they'll always say that, hey, anecdote is anecdote, but how many anecdotes do you need, especially as a professional that's working with clients and constantly talking to people about nutrition, to just, hey, there's clearly something here. So I think that's important too.
You ever hear the chambermaid study?
Mm-mm.
So this woman, Ellen Langer, she's at Harvard. She does this research to show like the role that stress plays in our health, basically. And it's a hard thing to study because to create controlled studies that can do this is really tricky, but she's real creative in how she does it. So one of her most well-known studies is called the chambermaid study. She took a group of chambermaids, so women that clean hotel rooms, right, and like remake the beds and stuff, and split them into 2 groups. Now, obviously, their job is very physical and they're active, and that they didn't associate their work with exercise, right? Like they didn't make the connection that they were exercising. And all they did with the study, they took one group and told them that you're exercising. Your work is exercise. And they made that association. The other group, they just let them continue to do their job. They didn't tell them anything. They didn't change anything else. No other variables were changed. And the group that was thinking or told that they were exercising lost weight. Their hip to waist ratio improved. Their BMI improved. Their blood pressure markers improved. Like they saw these improvements across the board, physically as well as like in actual measurable like metrics, like health metrics, just because they now thought that they were exercising. So, and I've heard people argue like, well, they probably now started to eat healthier because they thought they were exercising.
That's what I was going to say. Yeah.
Right. And there's always like this healthy user bias thing associated with all these things. But it just shows that there's deeper layers to all this stuff than just, and you see examples of it over and over again beyond just like what I put in directly is going to have this exact impact because that's what this study told me.
Yeah. And I saw Peter Attia share this today. And I think that I don't want to say that this is the problem that I have with like the side of the coin that's like, hey, these foods, these ingredients are bad for you, which I was, kind of fell into that bucket big time. But I do think that being a parent now has changed a lot for me in that, and what Peter Attia talked about was that, there's a total lack of awareness for your health is kind of on this side, and that's bad too. But there's also like a side of health awareness that like crosses into health anxiety, and that isn't good for anyone easy. And for me, it's just been like I have enough things to worry about now to where like, like making sure that, the thing that we buy doesn't have, canola oil in it or whatever is like the least of my worries because it's such a minimal part of what we eat anyway. Like, are we eating that stuff all the time? No. But I think that, it kind of gets to a point where if you're listening to every little thing that you should be avoiding and adding that to like the endless list of other concerns that I have now, I would drive myself nuts. So for me, it's been helpful to definitely loosen the reins on that side while acknowledging that like that doesn't completely disqualify food quality, but it just means that, I don't need to be so maniacal about stuff, especially because going back to what I was saying before, I do have a very high food drive and there's a lot of foods that I enjoy that I don't want to cut out. So,
dude, gentlemen, they called those chambermaids?
Chambermaids, yeah.
I had never heard that term before.
I never really did either until I read the study.
Can we just give some practical advice to people out there who might be listening to this podcast who are looking at their nutrition and going like, okay, yeah, it's great that you guys all just said all that shit, but what should I do? The thing that I would do. Yeah, no, I wouldn't. The thing that I would do is I would take some time to reflect on what your goals are. That would be the first thing that I would do. Take some real time to reflect what your goals are and what your priorities are. And I think that includes not only your physical goals, your training goals, your physique goals, but also like your life priorities and where does that fall for you? And, do you have a family and kids and all this kind of stuff? And take a look at that. And then take a look at where you're currently at with your nutrition and then evaluate, okay, what do I want to commit to this to get to what my goal is? And you might have to have, some things that need to change very drastically. You might have some things that need to change on a more minor sense. But if you're kind of struggling out there, just pick one thing. Just pick one thing for a period of time and try that one thing. And whether that's, hey, I want to try to hit a protein goal every day for the next 3 weeks. I want to literally try to eat, my body weight in protein or what I want my lean body mass in protein to be in 1 gram protein per pound of body weight. Pick that. Hey, I'm eating way too many highly processed desserts. I want to cut that down. I'm going to only do 1 or 2 a week. Cool. Just try one thing for a few weeks and then see how you feel. And then try another thing if you don't feel really good after that. So that's just a practical piece. Don't try to do, Rome wasn't built in a day. Neither will your nutrition completely everything magically fixed tomorrow, but try one thing.
Dan, what's your piece of advice?
Yeah, I mean, I would certainly agree with that. I mean, the only thing I would add maybe is to find some or ensure that you have some kind of support system, whether it's someone that's going to do it with you, a coach to guide you through it, a group of people that are all kind of in it together. Some kind of support system makes everything that much easier for sure.
My biggest thing, and I saw this tweet this morning, so I'm going to read it because I really like this, from Alan Aragon, who's big on the evidence side, but I think he has some really good nuanced takes on stuff. But he said, the secret to reaching and maintaining fat loss goals is a diet consisting of meals you look forward to, a training program you enjoy, and the acceptance, embracing of actual hunger at some point between meals. And I love how he summed all that up. But my tactical piece of advice would be, if you're anything that you're going to do, especially with the new year coming up, that completely eliminates all the foods that you enjoy is never going to be sustainable, and you're setting yourself up for failure. Whether that's counting macros or giving yourself flexibility on weekends, or to MDB's point, like just choosing one thing to work on so you're not trying to clean everything up. Like, you have to keep the things that you enjoy and look forward to. Otherwise, you're only going to be able to white knuckle change for so long. And this stuff needs to be sustainable, because it's not going to be fixed in 30 days, 60 days, 90 days. It should be something that you can do, perpetually. So,
dude,
Jay, close us out.
Oh, gentlemen, I've enjoyed this conversation. I learned about learned some new topics. I heard about a guy who double overhand with no belt deadlifted 500 pounds. And I mean, I'm really impressed by that, man. I feel like I need to go in the garage right now and go try that.
You can definitely do it.
No, I don't think so. This was
what's your all-time best deadlift?
I think I got I got about 600. I know I hit 575. I think I got 600 one time.
Yeah, you can still deadlift 500 pounds.
Nah, dude,
yeah.
I don't know.
Yeah.
It's a huge for everybody out there, we really appreciate you guys. Make sure to join our newsletter, right? The Never Zero newsletter. Every single week, we're putting out awesome content. Go check out the other episodes of the podcast, whether it's Gabe and I, whether it's this crew, whether it's all of our other guests. And as per usual, if you're getting value from these episodes, whether it's our nutrition talk today or some other things, share these episodes with a friend, right? Let's try and level up, men. Let's try and get people to the next step in their journey. And by sharing this with people, that's the way that we're going to spread the message more and more and more. More important than anything, I hope you and your family are absolutely crushing it and keep training hard. See you guys again next week.